43 years ago, group of men saw a creature standing in between a pair of trees, and that wasn't all. They found evidence they believed belonged to Bigfoot. He had a GoPro strapped backward to his pack. The lens pointed at whatever was behind him on the trail. That night, watching the footage back, he found a massive figure between two trunks, watching him walk away. He had never heard it move. 50 meters through the spruce. The rainforest near Tofino, on the west coast of Vancouver Island, does not let lay too cleanly. Sika spruce rise 200 feet overhead, their trunks wrapped in wet moss that drips onto the understory all day. And the trail narrows to a single green corridor, where visibility collapses to whatever the next bend allows. In 2006, a brother and sister were hiking that corridor together. Quiet in the way people go quiet when the forest gets big enough to feel like a room. 50 meters ahead, something was standing between the trees. The sister saw it first and stopped walking. She described it later as humanoid, roughly 7 feet tall, dark, shoulders too broad for a man, completely motionless in a patch of filtered green light. Her brother froze beside her. The figure did not shift its weight. It did not turn its head. It simply stood in the corridor the way a deer might stand. Except, deer do not stand upright, and deer do not have shoulders. She raised her phone. The moment the camera came up, the figure turned and moved into the undergrowth with a single fluid motion. Not a bolt, not a crash. A deliberate withdrawal. The movement of something that had finished whatever it came there to do. The footage shows only a brief dark shape sliding between two trunks, already half dissolved into the green. They argued about it for the rest of the hike. One of them kept saying bear, the word getting quieter every time. The other stopped answering. 50 meters is close enough to register size and posture. It is too far to see a face. The ridge line. The father was driving. The son was in the passenger seat with one boot up on the dash, half asleep in the late autumn. Late, the kind of slanted goal that turns a Pacific Northwest logging road into something almost ceremonial. They had worked a stretch of forest dozens of times before, heading out to cut firewood together, the way they had every October since the boy was old enough to swing an axe. The air coming through the cracked window smelled like dry pine and cold earth. The father said his name once, quietly, and pointed. 400 yards across the valley, on the opposite ridge, a figure was crossing the road on two legs. Its stride was deliberate, unhurried, broad-shouldered. Nothing in the gait matched a deer or a bear. The son came awake all at once. His hand shot into the back seat for the camcorder, without his eyes ever leaving the figure, fingers scrambling over tarps and chainsaw cases, until they closed around the hard plastic shell. By the time the record light blinked on, the figure was already clearing the pavement and slipping behind a mound of rocks at the far edge of the tree line. The footage holds it for less than a second. They did not speak for the first mile of the drive home. The father gripped the wheel with both hands. The son watched the clip back on the small fold-out screen over and over, the same half-second loop. When they posted it online that night, they did not claim Bigfoot. They asked one question. No one could answer it. What in the hell? Clip on a wooded trail in the high country. And the footage contains no visual evidence at all. What it preserved is worse than anything a camera could have caught. The audio was ordinary at first. A dog panting somewhere near the hiker's boots. Wind dragging through the canopy overhead in long, slow pulls. The crunch of dry needles under rubber soles. The ambient rhythm of a forest that believes it is alone. Then something else bled through the trees from somewhere deeper in. Lower on the slope, obscured by undergrowth. A vocalization rose out of the timber. Low, guttural, sustained. It was not a howl. It was not a bark. It was not the territorial scream of a mountain lion. And it was not the bugle of an elk in rut. The hiker had spent his life in these mountains that heard every animal that lives in them. He had never heard this. It rolled uphill through the canopy, hung in the cold air for several long seconds, and faded slowly back into the direction it had come from. The hiker's reaction was involuntary. His body stopped before his mind caught up. His voice, captured raw on the recording, carried the unmistakable flatness of a man whose survival instincts had just overridden every rational thought in his head. What in the hell? He did not move toward the sound. He did not investigate. He stood on the trail and listened, one hand still on the strap of his pack. The dog pressed hard against his calf. Neither the dog nor the source of the sound ever appeared on camera. but the audio preserved something primal, a vocalization that its lifelong outdoorsmen could not identify, could not categorize, and could not explain. The sounds come first, the visuals come later. Burkhead Mountains, North Carolina. On May 13, 2017, at 4:31 in the afternoon, a man was hiking deep inside Burkhead Mountains National Forest near Asheboro, 10 miles from his vehicle. The parking lot had been empty when he pulled in. Heavy rain the day before had kept everyone away. The trail was slick with red Carolina clay that turned the ground into a slow-moving slide under his boots, and the air still carried the cold, mineral smell of wet stone. He found the footprints crossing the trail directly in front of him, a line of deep humanoid impressions pressed into the white clay, each one 15 to 20 inches long. They came down from a brush-covered hillside, crossed the path, and vanished into dense forest on the other side. He crouched beside them, photographed them carefully, told himself there had to be a rational explanation, and kept hiking. He did not believe in Bigfoot. That night, lying in his tent in total darkness with the rain hammering the nylon above him, he woke to sounds that rearranged his understanding of what lives in those mountains. High-pitched screams, gurgling, lead vocalizations that sounded almost organic, as if something were breathing through fluid, low sustained moans that echoed off the canopy and seemed to come from every direction at once, bouncing between the hills until the source was impossible to locate. He lay flat on his back in the dark. His breathing went shallow. His right hand found his weapon without his eyes telling it to. Every rational explanation he tried to construct collapsed against the raw alien quality of what was appearing through the trees around him. He lit his lantern, tore his camp prepared with hands that would not stop shaking, and hiked 10 miles back to his vehicle in the dark. Alone. Through the same forest where those 20-inch prints had crossed his trail. 8 hours earlier, the sounds followed him for the first mile before the distance finally swallowed him. To this day, he cannot reconcile what he heard with anything that should exist in those woods. Barefoot in the snow. In 2014, a group of children were playing in snowy woods near a backyard treehouse while one of them recorded video on a phone. Fresh powder covered the forest floor in an unbroken sheet. The air was sharp enough to sting the inside of the nose. Every branch crack sounded closer than it was, the way sound always behaves in deep winter woods, where the snow absorbs everything except the cold. The camera panned across the trees and caught a large dark figure moving upright to a gap in the trunks. He crossed the opening once and disappeared. The children's first instinct was bear. They were old enough to know what lives in those woods and young enough to still trust the first answer they reached for. One of them pleaded, another laughed nervously. Then they walked out to the edge of the tree line and found the tracks. Pressed into the fresh snow near where the figure had been standing were long, clearly defined impressions shaped unmistakably like bare feet. Not boots, not plows. Bared human feet in freezing snow, each one far larger than any adult shoe. 5 toes, a heel, a clean arch. Bigfoot investigator Jack Barnes later analyzed the footage using a nearby picnic table as a scale reference. His estimate placed the figure at approximately 8 feet tall. The video divided the internet within days of going online, but the tracks resisted easy dismissal. Costume wearers leave boot prints, bears leave paw prints. Whoever walked through that snow left impressions that matched neither, and it did so barefoot in freezing temperatures 100 yards from a treehouse where children would play. The prints did not melt out for 3 days. 5 encounters in. A shape between the spruce, a figure on the ridge, a sound with no source. Footprints in wet clay. Bare feet pressed into freezing snow. The ones still ahead are the encounters that made researchers stop using the word maybe. Subscribe before going further. What comes next is harder to walk away from. The branch at Hoodoo Creek. Day 3 at Hoodoo Creek, Eastern Oregon. Deep inside the North Fork, John Day Wilderness. The canyon walls rose steep on both sides of the hiker's campsite, choked with old-growth conifer. And the dry creek bed below him was littered with loose rock that channeled every small sound into something larger. He had been watched for 2 days. He knew it. On day 1, he had seen the runner, a dark figure moving down the hill through thick brush at a speed that made no sense for the terrain. On day 2, something reddish and upright had paced him through the trees above the camp, matching his movement with a precision that was not coincidence. By the third afternoon, he had stopped pretending he was alone. He was filling a water bottle at the edge of the creek when the first branch came down. It did not fall, it was thrown. It came from somewhere up the slope above him, tumbling end over end through the air, in a flat arc that ended in the rock 6 feet from where he was kneeling. He flinched hard and looked up. The slope was steep and heavily timbered. He could see nothing between the trunks but shifting patches of light. Then the second branch came. This one landed closer. He could hear the impact through the rock before his brain finished processing the sight of it. He stood up slowly, the water bottle still in his hand, water spilling down his wrist unnoticed, and stared up the hillside at a point he could not quite fix on. Something up there had range. Something up there had aim. Something up there was using the high ground against him on purpose. That night, the screams came up out of the canyon below his tent. He hiked out at first light and never went back. The heat on the hillside. Just before midnight on October 30th, John Brown was looking at a screen in his brother's hand. The screen glowed monochrome gray. On it, against the cold backdrop of the forested slope behind their property in Grays Harbor County, Washington, was the unmistakable heat signature of a living body. Head, shoulders, upper chest, standing 3 or 4 feet lower than the position they were watching from. Neither brother spoke. The air outside was cold enough to see breath by. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away through dense timber. The only sound was the faint electronic hum of the thermal unit and the brothers' own breathing, too shallow and too fast. John leaned in closer to the screen. The figure on the hillside did not move. It was simply there, warm and massive and wrong, occupying a spot on the slope where nothing of that size had any business standing. They ruled out deer immediately. The shape was wrong. They ruled out cattle. They considered bear and discarded it. No black bears were documented in the immediate area, and the silhouette was too upright, too broad across the shoulders, too still. When the figure finally moved off the slope, and the heat signature faded, the brothers walked out at first light to the spot where it had been standing. The ground held footprints, large ones, deep ones. Comparison measurements against their own prints in the same soil showed significant differences in length and width. Using a scale pole at the recorded position, they estimated the figure at approximately 4 feet across the shoulders and 7 feet tall. Thermal imaging does not capture costume details. It does not capture camera tricks. It captures body heat radiating from a living organism. And something warm-blooded and massive had been standing 40 feet from the back of their house. Ben slept on the couch that night. The thermal unit powered on beside him. Its monochrome screen pointed at the back window. He did not reveal the footage again until daylight. The carpenter. The carpenter was hiking alone through a forest on a routine trip, the kind of quiet solo walk he had taken dozens of times before. He wore a backward-facing GoPro mounted on the top frame of his pack, recording the trail behind him out of habit. The hike was uneventful. He saw nothing unusual, heard nothing unusual, and felt nothing unusual for the entire length of the walk. That night, back home, he pulled the footage onto his laptop and scrubbed through it. He almost missed it. Partially concealed behind the trunk of a large tree, a massive figure stood motionless in the forest, half visible through the gap between 2 trunks, watching him walk away down the trail. It did not follow. It did not vocalize. It did not shift its weight. It stood there and observed, still as the trees around it, perfectly positioned to see the trail without being seen by anyone walking forward along it. He had passed within yards of it. His body had been fully exposed. His back had been turned. His attention had been pointed in the wrong direction for the entire duration of the encounter, and the figure had chosen to stay hidden. That single detail, the choice not to engage, is more disturbing than any charging figure or aggressive display. It implies awareness. It implies decision-making. It implies that whatever stood in those trees understood exactly what it was looking at, weighed its options, and decided, for now, to let him pass. The carpenter watched the clip 3 times before he stopped watching it. Then he closed the laptop and sat in his kitchen for a long time in the dark. Every hiker who has ever walked a forest trail alone has had their back to the trees behind them. The footage asks one question that cannot be unasked. How many times has something been standing there, watching, and choosing to remain unseen? Lettuce Lake. In Florida's Lettuce Lake Park, on a humid afternoon, where the air hung thick enough to taste, A visitor filmed the figure moving through knee-deep swamp water beneath a canopy of bald cypress draped in Spanish moss. The lake was low and green, filtered through layers of vegetation that turned the swamp into something prehistoric. The water was black with tannins. Insects droned in every direction, and the smell of rotten warm mud rose off the surface in waves. Something was wading through it upright. Its arms swung independently at its sides. Its shoulders rolled with each step. It moved with a purpose that looked nothing like a lost tiger, and nothing like a foraging animal, and at one point, it reached down into the black water and pulled something free of the surface that the camera could not quite resolve. The visitor's thumb hovered over the record button. For a moment, he would later be unable to explain. He did not stop filming. He stood on the elevated boardwalk with the phone braced against the railing, aware on some level that what he was recording was not something he would be able to unknow. The immediate assumption was bear. Black bears are common in Central Florida, and a bear moving through shallow water is not unusual. But a park ranger who reviewed the footage stated directly that the creature in the video was not a bear. The proportions were wrong. Too tall, too narrow through the hips. The arms extended too far down the torso, and moved with too great a range of independent motion for any ursine anatomy. Then the figure turned its head toward the camera. Moments later, it slipped beneath the surface of the swamp and vanished completely underwater. Bears wade, bears splash. Bears do not submerge their entire bodies and disappear beneath the waterline. Locals identified it as the skunk ape, a creature reported across the Florida interior for more than a century. Described as a smaller, swamp-adapted relative of Bigfoot that stands around 7 feet tall and trails a powerful stench dozens of yards before it appears. The ranger had spent years identifying every animal in the park. He had never seen anything move like this. Little River, a hiker moving through deep wilderness along the Little River in Alabama, an area of heavy timber and almost no human traffic, pointed his camera at a clearing and held it steady. In the center of the clearing, a fallen tree lay across the forest floor, and on the fallen tree, a large dark hair-covered figure was sitting. The hiker did not run. Every instinct in his body was telling him to, and he did not. His hands were shaking hard enough that he had to brace the camera against the side of a trunk to keep the frame steady. And his breathing had gone so quiet, he could hear the blood moving behind his ears. He kept filming. He did not know why. Something about the figure's complete lack of reaction made running feel like the wrong answer. Like turning his back would be the decision that changed everything. It was not running. It was not hiding. It sat in plain view, perfectly calm, with no apparent concern about the camera or the man holding it. The visible details were extraordinary by the standards of this field. Long, heavy muscular arms, a broad chest, thick fur covering the entire body. A face clearly visible in the footage that occupied an uncanny space between human and primate. Flat-browed, dark-eyed, watchful. The proportions were wrong for a man in a suit. The posture was wrong for a bear. The stillness was wrong for a hoax, because a hoaxer wants to be seen moving. This figure simply sat, the way a person sits on a log to rest. The footage has been analyzed and dissected frame by frame since it surfaced. No consensus has ever been reached. What strikes most viewers is not the resolution or the estimated size of the creature. It is the calm, the total unsettling absence of fear. Every previous encounter on this list involved a creature that fled, hid, or dissolved into the trees the moment it sensed the camera. This one did not. It sat in the open, in full view, and allowed itself to be filmed. The expression on its face registered no alarm, no aggression, no curiosity. Just a still, steady awareness. As if the forest belonged to it. As if the hiker was the one trespassing. It's a patience. Drop a comment naming the encounter that cut deepest. The carpenter who never knew. The ranger who broke protocol. Or the figure on the log that refused to run. Subscribe so the next set of footage doesn't pass unseen. What walks behind you? The Little River footage is still online. The figure is still sitting on that fallen tree, frozen in the frame. Looking directly into the camera with an expression that isn't fear, isn't curiosity, and isn't aggression. It's patience. And somewhere in the forest you've already hiked to, something with that same patience may have watched you pass, and you never knew it was there.